And we are now live. Hi, I'm Autumn Keynes with Virtually Connecting, and I'm your virtual buddy along with Andrea Wren with some people on site and AK. I'm going to let the people on site introduce themselves first and then go to AK and then go to all the virtual participants, if they could just give us a short introduction.
Hi, I'm Andrea Wren, the on-site buddy. I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin on the last day of the Digital Pedagogy Lab. And I teach at Whittier College usually, and I'm incredibly glad to be here learning with all these amazing people.
I'm Chris Friend, Managing Editor for Hyperpedagogy. I have also been here all week, which means I'm exhausted. If I become incoherent, my apologies. That's why.
Amy Collier. I'm Associate Provost for Digital Learning at Middlebury College, and I got here on Wednesday, so I'm feeling okay, but maybe a little tired too.
Hi, I'm Sonia Chides. I'm the Instructional Media Designer at Whittier College, and I've been here all week, part of the network group.
Awesome. It's great to see you guys. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us. AK, why don't you introduce yourself? AK is my co-buddy today. He's helping me host today.
Hi, everyone. My name is AK. I'm from Boston, and today I am not a rocket surgeon. I'm generally an educational troublemaker.
That's fun. So now I'm going to ask each one of the participants to introduce yourself, and I'm just going to kind of go in the order that you're presenting yourselves to me on the screen. So Greg, could you just give us a quick overview?
Sure. My name is Greg McVeary, and I am joining you from Ed Camp. So we got a bunch of people who didn't like their sessions, if you can kind of see them, and are kind of walking and voting with their 2 feet and forming their own little sessions in the hallway. Ed Camp is fun.
That's fun. We're actually in 2 different conferences today. Patrice, can you go next?
Patrice Fresco, and I'm joining you from Ithaca, New York at Cornell University, where I spend most of my time championing globally networked learning experiences and ways to on-ramp women into STEM.
That's awesome. Welcome. And Scott, can you go next?
Yeah, I'm Scott Robison, joining from Plymouth State University in Plymouth, New Hampshire. I'm the director of Ed Tech here on campus.
Awesome. Great to meet you and have you here with us today. And Stephanie, I think you're the last one in my little list here.
I'm Stephanie Loomis, at Mrs. Loomis if you want to follow me on Twitter. I'm a doc student and a high school teacher and a general troublemaker when it comes to anything that has to do with technology. And I am the DigFed spirit today.
That is true. And so it looks like Jen just joined us. Jen, are you there? Can you hear us?
I'm here. Hello.
Hi. I'm sorry.
So we
Okay.
we were just in the middle of introductions. Can you give us a short introduction? And feel free to do an unintroduction if you'd like.
I could try an introduction, yeah. Hello, everyone. Edinburgh, and my area is digital education, and I got invited to come along and just say hi to everyone, and I was really delighted. So, hello, it's 8 o'clock at night on a Friday night in Edinburgh, so, you know, I'm feeling kind of Friday evening-ish.
It's awesome to have you here, Jen. Thank you so much for joining us. So Andrea and everybody there on site, this is the end of the conference. Amy, you just gave a keynote. I don't know where you guys want to start. Why don't we just dive in?
Could we ask you to start, Amy? Because Amy and Jesse actually gave this sort of beautiful co-keynote this morning that if you were following the Twitter stream, you saw the awesome tweets like, I've knocked our socks off. Could I ask you to say anything that you felt you wanted to add or summarize or anything?
Sure. So the topic, as many of you probably know from the Twitter stream, was kind of emergent learning, and we kind of try to frame emergent learning as a space of opportunity and also a space of resistance to some of the pressures that higher education is facing right now around kind of the age of accountability, the pressures of measurement of narrow and clearly defined learning objectives for the purposes of kind of getting a handle on what learning means and kind of getting all learners to the same spot, and how that takes away from some of the really exciting opportunities for diversity in education, for outcomes to be kind of speculative or exploratory or awe-inspiring. So we went through kind of 3 provocations related to this. So the first was something related to complexity, and how complexity is something we should strive for in education, and how complexity allows you, when you embrace it, allows you to kind of have play and fun and joy and excitement around learning as well. And then there was point number 2, or provocation number 2, was around the measurement of learning, specifically that this kind of push for evidence-based teaching has really narrowed both what we think of as learning, what counts as learning, but then also what we think of is evidence of what counts as learning. So it really narrows both how we define learning and how we define research on learning, and how that's a problem as well. And then, or it can be problematic, I should say. It's always a problem, but it can be problematic. And then the third was a provocation around learning outcomes, and really strict, you know, if you think of the previous outcome, or sorry, the previous provocation as being about the ends of education, right? The learning, the things that we're talking about there, or the research on learning, then what Jesse talked about in provocation 3 was the means, the methods by which you teach and through which learning happens, and how by setting really strict learning outcomes and using things like quality matters rubrics and things like that can really put kind of corral learning into a space that is too defined, too narrow, and maybe not exploratory enough. So that was kind of where we went.
And to tag onto that, it positions students as being these predictable entities that are each identical and can be molded into the exact same finished product by the end of a semester or a course or a degree program or something along those lines. And I think you were trying to push against that notion and remind us that students are individual, and that students come from different places, are in different positions, and that the makeup of our classes is very much different and very much plays into the way that things happen within our classes.
Right.
I teach first-year general education courses, and those are often very structured by very specific outcomes, because classes later down the road are usually seen as relying on what we do in our courses. And so this conversation always resonates very strongly with me, because, for instance, one of the classes I teach is all about research as genuine inquiry. And it's very difficult to teach students that what we mean in academia as research is to be curious about something, and to want to go find more knowledge about something, not necessarily answers, but knowledge, and to get them to drive their own curiosity about things. And to do that with outcomes is a very awkward tension. It's very difficult to frame outcomes in a way that allows for that genuine inquiry, that messiness of research, that emergent nature of student-directed learning.
Yeah, just to follow in, I did want to ask you all, really, but that word outcomes I found interesting in your talk. So you kept it there, but you kept framing it. But the word outcomes does, and you were challenging the endpoint, but outcome, I think it is an endpoint. So I kind of wanted to ask more about that.
And I think that's where, and that's why I brought Jen into the conversation as part of kind of, she's been my research partner in this, is that, you know, the kind of the space that we talk about when we're trying to push back on the notion of outcome as this fixed defined point that everybody should get to, is we start talking about not yetness, right? With not yetness being a place that we can kind of embrace the uncertainty, embrace the underdeterminedness of the learning experience, and how we can, you know, how that in itself is not really an outcome, but it's something that happens as a result of the learning experience that we're trying to foster. And so if you can embrace that, you know, it allows you to kind of not have to get always to an outcome, or to maybe think of outcomes as something that will continue to evolve, right, and that never really have an end point. That they're kind of we need a new word for that, like through points, or you know, something like that, right?
Or something. Right. Yeah, it doesn't sound good at all.
I know, it's good.
Through point is better. Yes, right.
Jen, I would love to ask Jen if she has anything. I'm not to put you on the spot since you haven't prepared anything, but any of you?
I'm probably about to repeat everything you just said because my Wi-Fi went, and now I'm back. So whatever. I was just thinking about not yetness, and thinking that actually for me it's as much about outcomes and taking responsibility as teachers for what happens in our classes and our spaces is good. But I think that taking responsibility means making possibilities for things we don't know about that might happen. So I guess that for me it's actually kind of tied up in questions about whose power is at play in classes and how much we can allow for stuff that we didn't expect to happen. And I just think we really, really have to leave room for it because it is going to happen. And if we don't, then it's cutting out a whole bunch of interesting stuff. So yes.
And that goes back to the readings that Jen and I had done when we were writing some of our papers. Gert Biesta and others who I cited today, where he talks about how there are, when you start to talk about what works in education, like these how do you get to an outcome with an input to outcome, then what you end up doing is forgetting to ask the really philosophical question of what works for what. Yeah. And what works for whom, and what is really the purpose of what we're trying to do here. And that's something that a lot of times the what works mechanism kind of forces us, or it tends to help make us think that everything, that we all agree on what that is. Right. And that we all agree on the for whom and what gets privileged when we ask that question of what works. And so I think it does, when we start to kind of step back and say, let's embrace not yetness for a little bit to make sure that we understand what gets privileged in some of these classroom environments where there's a strong input to output kind of push, and who gets privileged, and what kind of diversity are we neglecting to recognize when we just focus on input to output? What identities, what things like that.
I have to ask one more question, and then I know that I've asked a bunch, and I can see that the chat on the side is full of questions. I wanted to say, first of all, I think this conversation is so important because clearly the largest power, the institutional power, is forcing us towards outcomes, and so your voice is so important here. We need to hear it, and we need to celebrate it. And so I asked this question in that spirit, right? But then I also wonder, emergent outcomes, I'm on board as a teacher, but I know that my students feel very nervous when I don't tell them what the endpoint is going to be. And particularly, I teach in California. I love California. Our public schools have been underfunded for a long time, and our students have been tested a lot. And they don't know that they're going to pass the test. They get very nervous. And sometimes productive discomfort can be productive, and sometimes I can feel like I'm not being fair to them, creating too much tension. So I just wanted to throw that out and also say I'm going to now step out.
I think it's a great question. One of the questions that Jen and I have actually been kind of struggling with and thinking about, we started to kind of put some thoughts on paper, but we're not quite very far with it. But one of the questions is, in the same way that we have to think critically about this accountability movement, the input to output pressures, we also have to think critically about the notion of not yetness, because there are ways in which putting an environment like that is amorphous and difficult for some learners to really thrive in. We have to think about who wouldn't thrive in that kind of environment, and how do we make it a space that is more, it's hard to make us. I think safe space was kind of a tricky word this week, right? People were kind of saying, how safe should you make a space so that a learner doesn't feel at threat in a learning environment, but then also has the space to explore and move? And I think that's a great question to ask. I think that critical lens is really important in all these environments.
And as an antidote to the word outcome, I often like thinking in terms of goals. And I know it's a very slight difference, but I think it's making progress in the right direction, where it doesn't feel like it's something that has to be wrapped up, but it's something that I'm aiming toward. And if I have students who are uncomfortable with that lack of definition that we were talking about, if I say, well, we're aiming toward this, can you show me how you're getting toward that? that's the terminology that they're familiar with, and we're able to kind of reach a common ground there. Also able to provide some examples and say, it could look like this, it might look like that, and that gives them something to latch onto and work toward. And as they go through that process, then we can work on well, this might turn out differently for you, based on what you've seen, and that's okay. And now that you're here, you understand why that's okay, because you're doing something for your learning process.
I think those questions are really important to have as a process with the students, right? To say, look, maybe we have to set some goals for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's because of accountability things that you just can't get away with get away from your institution, or whatever it is. But thinking about those and saying, okay, to students, if these are the endpoints, at least for this semester or quarter, how might I assess you? Let's talk about what it's going to look like for you as a learner, and how might we think about the ways in which you want to work through this goal, right? And where do you want to end up at the end of it? Maybe it's totally different.
And I think I'm in teacher ed, so if you want to see where accountability is going in higher ed, come look to us, because my students have to take 7 different tests just to get certified. So it's hard because I wanted to be open and I want to drop all that accountability, but I also feel like I have a moral obligation to prepare them for the tests, because if they don't pass, they don't get a job. So there's a tension here for me where it's like I have to almost go against what I believe philosophically, because I also feel a responsibility for my students who live in an accountability-based era. So it's a tough call for me.
I was in the networks track, and part of the reason why I was here also is I'm more of a facilitator at Whittier College with faculty and also with students, more in the line of teaching digital literacy. So thinking about learning outcomes and what it means for students to be digital literate, that's a big question that we're amongst the emergent technologies, and how do you assess that? It's also a big responsibility to think, okay, well, what are the tools that we're pushing on faculty and students, and are we being critical about them? How do we help them navigate between all of we're helping, or at least we're trying to help them to create personal learning networks, but also grow them, whether it's within, their scholarship, or if they're planning to go to graduate school, or they're planning to, just connect with other people within their field. But how to be smart about it, how to sort of, wrangle in all of the abundance of information that's out there. And so for that, as educational technologists, and the way that that's taken a turn, it's really, this last week has been really enlightening, because especially in my class, a lot of us are in the same boat, and we're trying to find nice, clean-cut answers, and we had to, I guess, be okay with leaving that they're not all there, we're not all going to find them, and the not-yetness of it, as much for our students and our faculty that we work with, but for us as educational technologists.
Right. I think there are some people asking questions in chat.
Yeah, there's like a separate conversation going on in chat. It's kind of cool. There's almost like a separate sort of like Twitter stream going on. Scott brought up some stuff about caring space, and I think I know where he's going with that, because that came up on the Twitter stream, and that seemed to be one of the themes. And I think when you guys were talking about, the student feeling, feeling nervous about that, like a student wants to, some students anyway, really want to, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to get my grade? What do I have to do to pass this class? What do I have to do to get my degree? And so how can we make them embrace this idea of emergent outcomes? And I think that maybe goes back to that whole idea of creating a caring space, creating a space where they feel safe in that. And for me, I found what is, kind of like a powerful kind of way to approach that is, because that's real life, yeah, you're going to have some situations in life where you're given, you've got to do X to get to the next step, but most of the time you're not going to get that. Most of the time it's going to be more ambiguous than that, and it's going to be, you're going to have to figure it out.
Hey, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, a few mental gears started grinding with all this discussion, and just for those who don't know, my day job is in a Department of Applied Linguistics, and we prepare students to be foreign language and ESL educators. And our department takes a critical pedagogy approach to what we do. Of course, one of the things that is a critique or a helpful critique of our program is that we talk a lot about critical pedagogy, but we don't necessarily prepare students for the day-to-day grind of what it is to be a teacher. And thinking about what Greg said about the 7 separate tests that you need to take to be an educator, it reminds me a lot of this day-to-dayness that to happen, not just in teaching, but in every profession. And we need to prepare our students to persevere through that day-to-dayness, but also be critical and subversive whenever it's necessary, and give them the tools to be able to do that within their environments.
Well, I was to say something that came up, and maybe this will relate to what you were going to say. That one of the things that we were talking about today after the keynote during the Q&A was that one of the things that all of these lenses, I think, help us to do is to be more reflective in our practice. That even when the day-to-day really pushes us into patterns that we don't always necessarily agree with, or kind of need space and time and support to go against, reflective practice helps us to continue to look for ways, to look for opportunities, to look for collaborators and co-conspirators in this endeavor. And so I think that that kind of reflective practice would be really important to any of these folks.
Responding to a question that I saw in the chat from Patrice, she's asking about how these things apply to what she calls more linear courses like mathematics or computer science. And this actually came up in your part of the talk. She was referencing Dan Meyer and some of the work that he does in getting his, I think, middle school students, if I recall, to work on mathematics problems not as word problems or predefined algebraic equations and such, but to view them as genuine real-life issues that they want to find an answer to, and they have to use mathematics in order to get there. And so he will make a short video, and he will intentionally leave off the part that you really, really want to see, and he will leave the students in this awkward, frustrating suspense until they say, I want to know how that turns out, I want to figure out how it will turn out, and I now need to go find the math knowledge that I need to be able to do this thing. And mathematics is very linear. You have to learn this before you can learn that. But why not, aim for the final thing and then have the students figure out, well, I need to be able to do this, but I don't know how. Okay, now we can talk about something that's necessary and relevant, and you see how it fits into a bigger picture. The example I always love, he shows himself shooting a basketball toward a hoop, and you see it go, and then just screen goes black. And you're like, no, did he make the hoop or not? And so the students learn about those shapes and how to measure them and how to trace them through space and see if it'll actually make it. And then after they do their work, he resumes the video, and they get to see whether they were right.
And he actually, the video has kind of four shots. He takes 4 different shots, and I think sometimes he will break them into groups and say, okay, you're A, you're B, you're C, or D. Figure out for your group if it makes the shot, and then they have to kind of talk about how they did that and how they got to the point where they are. And I think, a lot of times I think it's really easy in disciplines that are linear and have a little bit more kind of step-by-step learning processes for us to, as you said, kind of just treat it, that the learning as it would just mirror the discipline. And I think at the same time, when we think about how those disciplines get employed in real life, and I think somebody said this, and so I'm probably stealing it from the chat, life is messy, and the ways in which we use math and science and medicine was the example that got pulled up today. One person was saying, well, my dental hygienist, their hands are in people's mouths, and they need to know exactly how to do that. And at the same time, those interactions, patient interactions, problem solving in real time, all of those are things that are not just linear. And so understanding them in the complex environments that they happen really can give students the chance to develop tools and approaches to dealing with those.
The same could be argued in my field of composition. A lot of people would argue that you have to learn grammar and spelling and sentence structure and diagram them and such in order to write properly. But there's been a whole bunch of research that argues the exact opposite, that the more attention we pay to those things that are traditionally considered fundamental, the more we actually screw up a student's ability to understand how writing really does work in the world. And if we just jump to what we usually view as the end result, which is how is your writing going to make a difference? How is your writing going to do something, influence people? Then they have a goal with it, and they know what to do with their writing.
Are there any questions?
Just do want to note, we're having a little sidebar in our group chat, but a lot of people on Twitter are trying to follow along too, so use the chat for us to kind of, if you want to raise your hand and say, oh, I want to speak next. But if you have kind of like general chat comments and you are active on Twitter, throw them out there because there are people that are trying to follow along. And so AK has his hand up, so I'm going to mute.
Hey, I feel like I'm just back in school again. So one of the notions that we discussed briefly was this notion of being safe, and reframed a little bit in the chat as having a caring environment. Being safe is something that I always took as a given in the class, but it seems like if you look at Inside Higher Ed, Chronicle of Higher Education, other venues of higher ed, that having a safe environment is coming under attack. And I am wondering how each member here interprets what is this environment. So if something just doesn't make me very comfortable but I can deal with it, is that a safe environment, or how does everybody perceive it? For me, the origin of the safe environment is kind of like the Stanford prison experiment. That's not safe. It puts you into physical and mental harm, but other than that, when it's not so egregious, how do we interpret that? How do we implement safe in our classrooms? And how do we communicate to the learners?
I could jump in briefly just to say I've done a little bit of work on what a colleague of mine calls the pedagogy of risk, which is trying to realize that we live in a society with a great deal of risks, especially if we're thinking about our students interacting, or us interacting virtually online. I'm a feminist, and being a feminist on Twitter is a dangerous thing to be. Being a person, in the world can be risky. And that rather than protecting our students, we need to try to find ways to teach what a friend of mine, Jay Davis, calls risk literacy. How to understand what the risks are in your situation and how to choose and choose not to take those risks. I think that's a pretty empowering concept.
I think it's in just thinking about the digital literacies that we're working with on students too, and how do you open up conversation and scholarship and extend the open or personal learning networks for students, and that in and of itself is a great risk for students because they, depending on the digital identity that they have, and to say, well, we're going to open this up so that your scholarship is open. There's a lot of questions that go along with that, but one of the themes was privacy and issues surrounding privacy this week, and just how do we encourage open learning within students, but also understanding that there are a lot of privacy issues and risks that are involved with that.
I think that trust is something that's very underappreciated in these situations where you can't just declare a classroom to be a safe space. You don't know who is going to feel in that situation. You need to instead build an environment where the students trust one another enough to be able to share exactly what they are feeling, what they are dealing with, what they are going through, so that any issues that do come up in an inherently risky or unsafe space can be addressed honestly and openly. That's the kind of safety I think we really want, but we can't simply refer to it as a safe space because that just doesn't exist when you have people involved who have real feelings.
So I wonder if one way to think about it, because I think the word safe raises some questions that I think are difficult for us to talk about, because we think about safe as either being a place where we don't grow because it's safe, or a place that we experience negative impacts because it's unsafe. And so, I was thinking, like, maybe one of the ways we can think about it is places of trust, right? Where these are environments of trust, and therefore people can leap if they need to, if they want to different places and feel comfortable or feel like they'll be supported in that. The other word that comes to mind instead of unsafe is kind of threat. And threat's kind of like an impact on your vulnerability. And I think it's different for everybody, right? We all have different vulnerabilities associated with identity, associated with our backgrounds, our resources available to us. And when there's a threat to that, I think that's when we have to really think about the space, that space becoming untenable for learners. Mm-hmm. I'm reminded, the reason I've been thinking about this a little bit this week is because I was in some of my preparations, and I ended up thinking, I was reminded of this video that surfaced maybe a couple of years ago now, where this professor at, I want to say it was at Cornell, Patrice, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, had a hissy fit on like a lecture capture video because a student yawned loudly in class. And so he's talking and he's doing some gesturing and things like that, and he hears this yawn, and immediately he whips around, body just raises up, and he starts yelling. And he starts kind of attacking, and he doesn't know who it is, so he's like, "Who did that?" And his voice gets really loud, and he starts threatening people, and "You won't like my bad side," and all this stuff. And I remember thinking, like, okay, there's a lot going on here. In addition to kind of the unhappy environment that was, that, you know, as a woman, I automatically kind of felt a little kind of threatened by this physical embodiment. I think these are just things that we have to kind of recognize and talk about. Sorry, I'm now reading the comments. I shouldn't.
You can get caught up in them for
like,
sure.
what?
Actually, I think Stephanie has a question, or she has something to add to the conversation.
Not really a question so much as one of the things that I have noticed over the last 20 years that I've been teaching in the high schools is common courtesy has seemed to have departed from our culture. And one of the things that I think as teachers we need to be really proactive about is the idea of civil discourse. It's okay to agree to disagree. And our students have gotten to the point, and we see it, I mean, with this election coming up, and the political mudslinging is already happening, and we're 16 months out. But our students are seeing adults act like kindergartners. So who's the model for what civil discourse looks like? And it's in civil discourse where we can find a safe classroom, because if we set an expectation that everybody's opinion is equally valid and you will respect each other even if you disagree, and if you disagree, find a respectful way to address that with facts. I think in that case, we're giving the students freedom to say what they think, knowing that they'll be respected, partly because as a teacher, as the authority in that classroom, you've demanded it, but I think on the other side of it, they learn how to do it. So when they leave our classrooms and go out into the real world, they're able to actually negotiate with people in real-world situations where they don't harm themselves because they don't come across as being willing to discuss reasonably.
I would go one step past the agree to disagree and say if we can get our students to understand both perspectives, we've got it. Because you can agree to disagree, but that can also be said dismissively, as though I'm just tired of arguing with you, so I'm going to call a truce and we're going to part ways. But if we get them to actually understand why someone would hold a position that is opposite their own, there's a tremendous gain from that understanding.
And I think when I say agree to disagree, I actually do mean going through that process. I've gone through it with several very close friends. We're very close friends. We have significant disagreements about certain issues, and guess what? We're still very close friends, but I understand her position, she understands mine, we just don't agree with them. And I think you're right. I think teaching them to understand the other point of view and the other lenses through which people view the world, I think long term we end up doing a greater disservice than whatever standardized test happens to be next.
Well, and I almost want to push back on this little idea of safety being the goal. I don't know if anybody's seen the recent CDC on parental health concerns, but internet safety and sexting beat out smoking. I think internet safety was 4 and 5, and it's this idea that we have to frame things that it's starting like this whole digital citizenship. It's this idea that we're starting from this idea that we're gonna mess up and that kids are in danger. And maybe if we frame it more, and I think this goes back to whoever was talking about the digital literacy, it's like we're giving them. It's more about empowerment. And instead of trying to hold back the gates on the bad stuff, let's try to flood the web with the good stuff and give the students a chance to negotiate these professional identities for the first time. I mean, yeah, they negotiated multiple identities before throughout their whole lives, but this is, as they're entering college, we're starting to really model what it means to negotiate professional identities in these online spaces. So I know I'm taking safety in a different metaphor than we were going with safe space, but I push back against that a little bit because there's just this fear mongering that goes on in digital learning spaces around safety. It is a real thing, though. I do agree.
It does seem like there's digital literacy opens up a responsibility of digital citizenship.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the idea of sort of trying to I'm trying to get away from the word scaffold. So now I'm trying to find terms, right? But create multiple intersecting pathways to build tools so that you can manage your own safety or something, rather than us managing it for them. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
I think it also begs the discussion, I think, of the tools that we use in our classrooms. More and more we're pushing students into environments where they don't really get to make those kinds of decisions. Mm-hmm. Their data is used in ways that they don't get to control, and because it's instructional use, mm-hmm. we're forcing them to do it. I think we need to be really careful about that kind of stuff. Especially the ed tech sector just keeps getting more and more full of these kinds of things, and more promises are being made about what they can do for us in terms of learning, but not what they can help us to, or how we can then discuss things like safety or not, digital citizenship or not, things like that.
More promises, fewer options.
Yeah.
Ooh. I think we just got our quotable tagline.
That's awesome. I want to check in with you guys on time because I know you're there at the conference, and so there's other stuff going on. How are we on time with you guys?
A couple more minutes? Maybe 5 more minutes?
Okay. I thought when I was just looking at the stream over here, I don't know if we've really touched on this. If we have, then feel free to move the conversation elsewhere. But I feel like Patrice is talking about some cool stuff in terms of faculty development. And maybe she could talk to that a little bit. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Patrice. We could just read it in the thing, too. But I think maybe if she verbalized it, it would be better.
That's fine. Primarily my comment was that, it still needs to be done well. And, what are your thoughts on, I don't want to use the word train, but, how would we educate faculty on this process? And I think, somebody in the chat had mentioned about how we use learning objectives and outcomes and things because it provides structure, and it's a very structured way to explain to a faculty member how to design their course. And so, how do we educate them about emergent outcomes so that they apply it effectively? Because we also don't just want meaningless chaos to go on in the room.
I almost want to say that lived experience is one of the best ways of doing this, because then you get to see, first off, what it felt like cognitively to move through the process, because as we addressed earlier, it can be frightening and unsettling, but then also seeing the benefit that comes from that unsettled place that you start in, and then also seeing the value of where you end up whenever you start with that kind of a goal in mind. Again, that word is now weighted, but to see that when you're finished with a course that uses emergent outcomes in it, you look back on it and you're able to reflect on what you have learned, and you realize that the things you've learned are probably a hell of a lot more valuable than what you would have been learned had you read the textbook. And I would say, if we're going to be, to use your word, training people in how to use emergent outcomes, gosh darn it, use emergent outcomes in the training to show them how that could go. And then the outcomes could be something like reflecting critically on the processes that we use when setting outcomes in a course, or reflecting critically on the way that we structure every part of a course rather than allowing the students to inform us what they need to be able to do what it is they have questions about. You showed your son on the screen this morning. I find myself thinking of him. She showed us videos of her son playing Legos, or playing with Lego bricks. And the first time we saw the video, the instructions were follow the instructions and build what's on the box. Second time through, the instructions were, here's a bunch of Legos, play. And the first time he was frustrated because he was trying to understand the instructions and then trying to get the product to match the instructions. And the poor kid never had a smile on his face at all. It was just frustrating trying to follow directions. Second time, smile was immediate. The noises started after a couple of seconds. He built something, played with it, and then added on to it, and then played more. And just seeing that joy emerge, as well as the outcome that he built for himself emerge as he went. It was so vivid and such a quick little example. Like, how long does it take a 6-year-old to play with Legos? Come on. It was neat to watch.
I just wanted to jump in and note that in the discussion thread down the side here, there's been now 2 people, and I'm going to hazard a guess and say there's more, who are saying, actually, I do want meaningful chaos to happen in my teaching and in the spaces where I'm working. And I think as a strapline, that might not be a bad one either.
Meaningful chaos. Yeah, meaningful chaos is good. Yeah.
Well, it was a slight play on word. The original comment was meaningless chaos. With emergent objectives, what you're striving for is meaningful chaos. So I was just kind of playing on my suffixes.
But meaning is a really interesting one, right? Because actually, what we do is make meaning out of whatever we're presented with, and I think that is, the chaos, the noise kind of comes out of the signal not because it's sort of the natural thing to come out, but because we are sort of meaning-making beings, and we try to do that. I'm plundering mercilessly from John Law here, who writes about mess in social science research, and I just think this is it, right? This is where we're at, people. Like, and I've really enjoyed hearing people talk about how you negotiate that in different kinds of classrooms and learning and teaching spaces. So thanks very much.
So before we go, Amy, I actually have a question for you from Maha. Earlier today, she asked me to ask you this question, and it has to do with your blog, Red Pincushion, and she wanted to know why it was named that and where that came from.
I used to have a sewing business. I used to sew things and sell them. And so sewing was kind of part of my identity at the time. And it was kind of, and at the same time, it was right about the time that Pinterest started to kind of come about. And I just kept thinking about the idea of my pincushion being a place where, I'm pulling things together. I'm then using them to sew and make things. I'm using them to help guide where I go, and then I take those pins out and I put them back in the pincushion, and then I take them out and I do something else. So it's just kind of that idea of lots of different things coming together into beautiful patterns that become beautiful products. So
fun little backstory on your blog.
You're naming my next blog.
Yay!
Feminist metaphor for making and learning.
to kind of take this just one step further, my very first kind of initiative as a sewer was to reclaim the apron as a feminist icon for women, to say, we're going to take the apron, we're going to take it out of the kitchen. So I used to actually make my own aprons and wear them out, and kind of try to reclaim the apron as no longer a symbol of domestication, but actually as a symbol of beauty and owning your experience. So we were the apron army.
Yay. Well, I think this might be the Apron Army signing off.
All right, well, I'm going to...
Funny enough, most of the aprons I made were for men.
Awesome. Feeling included again.
All right, well, you guys, thank you so much for taking some time out of the conference to talk to us who weren't, able to be there. It's really been a great experience for us to feel kind of like we were there and kind of get a taste of the conference. And if they do this thing next year, I'd love to try to make it, because it just looks like it's an amazing, I keep saying conference, but it's not a conference. It looks like an amazing institute.
Yeah, it has been.
Yeah. And come, because I want to meet you all in person too. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, we are still live, just so that you guys know, and we can stop being live, but on a few of these we have kept going kind of after the other folks have sort of dropped off, just to kind of do a little bit of processing. and have some kind of conversation amongst ourselves. So if you guys want to do that, if you want to, kind of talk a little bit, maybe even Greg could tell us a little bit about the conference that he's at. I know there was some other questions that maybe we didn't get to and that kind of thing. We can continue on.
Sure. Well, hold on, let me unplug. I am at EdCamp CT, and I don't know if anybody has been to an EdCamp or familiar with an EdCamp, but I'm going to go steal something so they can tell us about it. Here we go.
See what I mean? We never know what's going to happen. Now we're virtually connecting with another conference.
Just to jump in and say, it was lovely to see you all. I'm going to
and you will ever attend. It's free, it's relaxed, it's casual, and it's set the way you want it to be because you plan the sessions, you attend the sessions, you walk to different sessions, and it's all about teachers.
Thank you. So that's where I am. That's EdCamp. Just an unconference. It's fun.
That's awesome. Thanks, Greg.
All right. You can hear me?
I can hear you, AK.
Oh, awesome. So, we didn't hear a lot from Scott, so I'm wondering what his take is on some of the concepts that we explored today. Not to put him on the spot or anything. I just didn't want to have somebody excluded from the conversation.
No, that's very nice of you. I do have a comment going back to what, unfortunately, was it Patrice left? She made the comment about training faculty or educating faculty about some of these ideas, and I think that is, that is a tough one especially for those of us who work with faculty. I've been in a room a few times now when these type of discussions have been brought to faculty for the first time, and oftentimes the reaction, especially during the Q&A, is, how do I do this? It's not practical for me, or it's too much. And I think we heard that in the Q&A today, and I think we heard a little bit about that in our discussion here. And maybe it happened, but I think one way to help faculty or to explain to faculty is to say it's very much a continuum. I mean, what Jesse and Amy talked about today was, for some, I imagine, very overwhelming. But to think about breaking it up into pieces, or thinking about at least being aware, and then perhaps breaking it up into pieces and thinking of portions of your courses that you can work on. You don't have to you don't have to completely change your entire course, right? I mean, just think it's being aware of these ideas and maybe picking at pieces of the course and experimenting with them rather than thinking, oh, I have to do this all at once. So I think that probably was discussed at some point, but I think that might be a strategy for how do we help faculty understand or educate them about pretty challenging topics, right?
I'd have to agree.
Yeah.
I think it's
Go ahead, Greg.
I think it's about building in a couple different pathways within your courses. I mean, you don't have to go all in. You could, a little bit of choice within a class syllabus can go a long way to empowering students into that that not readiness, and letting them kind of, so it doesn't have to be, oh, well, I'm going in with just this blank piece of paper and you're going to write the syllabus for me. It could be, here's 4 or 5 different pathways you could choose from, and if you don't like one of these 4, feel free to propose another one, and we can negotiate those together. That's usually kind of where I have been starting, is just trying to build choice into the class.
Right.
I think options are good. It does, it kind of requires our students to have a certain level of self-awareness, though, and so I do have concerns about, do they really know which ones to choose. And are they going to go with just what's comfortable instead of what they really need to do to challenge themselves?
I think for students, a lot of variables come in. One of the things that I've been doing with the courses that I teach, some of the deliverables, I tell people in the class, I'm not giving you a predefined deliverable. It can be a paper, it can be a PowerPoint presentation, it can be something that you do on Prezi, it can be interpretive dance, but you do have an audience, so whatever delivery method you choose has to be accessible to that audience. And if you do pick, let's say, something in written form, here's an approximate word count so that you don't go nuts. Here is, if you do a presentation or something verbal or something that's a video, here's an approximate minute count, just again so that it can frame a boundary for you and you're not spending 100 hours on a project that really you should be spending 20. And I've been pleasantly surprised. A lot of students take creative ways and explore tools and approaches that they haven't explored before. So they are adventurous. I think when there's a time crunch, they go back to what's comfortable, but when they don't have a time crunch, they do go out and they explore other things, and they get inspired by their own classmates. They see that somebody did something else, and when they realize that that's attainable, they go explore it.
Yeah.
That sounds great. So I feel like we're going a little bit long here. How about if I stop the broadcast so that way we kind of generate our video, and if we want to continue talking offline, sometimes there's a little bit of an after show. We can continue the talking offline. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, this is Virtually Connecting signing off. Thanks. And I'm hitting this.